She thought she was safe at home. She accepted help from someone she trusted, walked inside, and the door closed behind them. By morning, only one person walked back out. So what happened in that house that night? She had grown used to living with quiet, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy kind that settles in after loss. Since her father died, the house he left behind felt larger than it should have. Rooms stayed unused. Boxes remained unopened. His old coffee mug still sat by the sink, exactly where he'd left it, chipped along the rim. She told herself she'd move it someday. She never did. She was 32 and lived alone in the small home on the edge of town, a place where neighbors waved but rarely spoke. Her days followed a steady rhythm. Work, errands, evenings spent avoiding the boxes stacked along the hallway wall. The paperwork scared her more than the grief. Deeds, insurance, things with consequences if handled wrong. Things her father had always taken care of. Her stepmom had offered help before, casually, without pressure. They had never been close, but they had shared enough holidays to feel familiar. Polite conversations, careful smiles, an understanding that they were connected by someone who was no longer there. That afternoon, the call came. Her stepmom's voice was calm, almost gentle. She said she'd been sorting through some of her father's documents. Important ones. Things that shouldn't wait too long. Maybe it would be easier to look at them together. She even mentioned dinner, said she'd cook something familiar. The invitation didn't feel strange. If anything, it felt practical, responsible. This was family business, and avoiding it hadn't made it go away. She hesitated only long enough to glance down the hallway at the unopened boxes, then agreed to come by that evening. The drive over felt routine. Same streets she'd driven 100 times. Past the gas station her dad used to stop at. Past the park where he'd taught her how to ride a bike. The sky dimmed as she pulled into the driveway, porch light already on, casting a warm glow over the front steps. The door opened quickly before she could knock. Her stepmom smiled, stepped aside, and welcomed her in. The house smelled like dinner, garlic, tomatoes, something baking. It was disarming the normalcy of it. They ate together at the dining table, plates resting on familiar placemats. Conversation stayed light. Work, the weather, how she was holding up. Nothing heavy at first. Nothing uncomfortable. Her stepmom listened more than she spoke, nodding at the right moments, offering reassurance without overdoing it. After dinner, the box came out. Cardboard, worn at the edges. Her father's handwriting scrawled across the top. Papers spread across the coffee table. Policies, statements, notes folded and refolded over the years. Seeing his handwriting made her chest tighten, but she stayed focused, flipping through slowly as things were explained to her. Some of it was a relief. The house was secure. No hidden debts. Things her father had quietly put in order without ever mentioning. She hadn't realized how much she'd been bracing for bad news until it didn't come. Tea was poured. The clock ticked past 8. Outside, the street had gone still. She checked her phone once, saw no new messages, and set it face down again. There was no rush, no reason to leave yet. Then her stepmom reached for another folder. She didn't smile this time. Her voice stayed calm, but the tone shifted, just enough to notice. "There's one more thing," she said. "Something we need to talk about." And in that moment, for the first time all evening, the room felt smaller. The folder stayed closed in her stepmom's hands for a moment longer than necessary. It rested on her knee, fingers spread flat across the cover, as if she were deciding how much to reveal and how quickly. The silence stretched, not awkward, but deliberate. It made the ticking clock on the wall sound louder than before. She waited. She didn't interrupt. She had learned long ago that when adults paused like this, it usually meant something important was coming. Her stepmom finally opened the folder and slid a single document onto the table between them. It was familiar in shape, official in tone. Life insurance. The kind of paperwork her father had always assured her was handled. She leaned forward slightly, eyes scanning for her name. Her stepmom began explaining before she could finish reading. The policy had been updated a year, before her father died. Not replaced, just adjusted. Small changes, really. Beneficiaries, percentages, legal language that sounded neat and harmless when spoken aloud. At first, it didn't feel alarming. Confusing, maybe. She asked a question, then another. Her stepmom answered patiently, choosing her words carefully, as if walking her through a delicate process rather than delivering news that might hurt. The explanation kept circling back to the same point. Things weren't as straightforward as she had assumed. There were conditions, timelines, decisions that still needed to be made. Some of them soon. Her stepmom framed it as concern, wanting to protect her, wanting to make sure nothing went wrong. She spoke about lawyers and fees, about how easily mistakes could happen when people were grieving. She said it would be best if they handled things together, at least for now. She listened, nodding slowly. None of it sounded threatening, but something about the way the conversation lingered on control, on access, on who should sign what, and when made her uneasy in a way she couldn't quite explain. She glanced around the room. The house looked unchanged. Family photos on the walls. A framed picture of her father on the bookshelf, smiling, arm draped around her stepmom's shoulder. The image grounded her. If he trusted this woman, she told herself, she could too. Her stepmom stood and went to the kitchen, returning with another cup of tea she hadn't asked for. She set it down close, within easy reach. The gesture was maternal, familiar. It softened the edges of the conversation. As the minutes passed, the tone shifted again. Less explanatory, more directive. Her stepmom suggested she stay a little longer. There was no rush, she said. It was already dark, and they hadn't finished sorting everything out. Better to take their time. Better to be thorough. She checked the time without thinking. Later than she'd realized. She felt a brief impulse to gather her things, to say they could continue another day. But she dismissed it almost as quickly as it came. Leaving in the middle of something like this felt rude, avoidant. Her stepmom noticed the glance at the clock. She smiled again, smaller this time. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," she said. "I just want you to understand what's at stake." The word lingered. At stake. She picked up the document again, reading more carefully now. The language felt denser than before, harder to follow. Her stepmom leaned closer, pointing out lines, explaining implications. Their shoulders nearly touched. The house was quiet except for their voices. No phones buzzing. No interruptions. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows across the windows. And somewhere between the explanations and the reassurance, she began to realize she wasn't just being informed. She was being guided, and she wasn't entirely sure where that guidance was meant to lead. She told herself the feeling would pass. Unease often did, especially in conversations like this. Money had a way of making people tense. Paperwork always felt heavier at night. That didn't mean anything was wrong. It just meant she was tired. Still, she shifted on the couch, creating a little distance between them. The movement was subtle, but she noticed her stepmom noticed it too. The explanation paused for half a second before continuing, as if recalibrated. Her stepmom suggested they organize the documents by importance. The most urgent ones first. She stacked papers neatly, aligning corners with care. The precision felt rehearsed. Each document had a place. Each next step already thought through. As they worked, her stepmom asked questions that didn't seem necessary. How much money she had saved. Whether she'd spoken to anyone else about the paperwork. If anyone knew she was there tonight. The questions were asked lightly, woven into conversation, but they landed with weight. She answered honestly at first, then more carefully. She felt herself choosing words, offering less detail. The instinct surprised her. She didn't remember deciding to do it. It just happened. Her phone buzzed once in her bag. A vibration against the cushion. She reached for it without thinking, but her stepmom was already speaking, already pointing to another page. The moment passed. She didn't check the message. The air in the room felt warmer now, thicker. Her stepmom stood and adjusted the thermostat without asking. "It gets drafty at night," she said. "You don't want to catch a chill." The doors were locked. She noticed it when her stepmom turned the deadbolt with a practiced twist. Not dramatically, casually, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. A small alarm flickered in her chest. People lock doors at night, she reminded herself. That was all. They moved to the dining table, spreading the documents out again. The overhead light buzzed faintly. Shadows pooled at the corners of the room. Her stepmom's voice stayed even, steady, but the words grew firmer, more final. At one point, she asked to take photos of the documents to review later. Her stepmom hesitated, just a beat. Then she said it wasn't a good idea. Too easy for things to get misinterpreted out of context. Better to handle it together. She felt foolish for feeling disappointed by the answer. Why should that matter? And yet it did. She checked the time again. Much later now. She mentioned heading out soon, said they could finish another night. The suggestion was gentle, reasonable. Her stepmom didn't say no. She just didn't move. She continued talking, shifting the conversation toward next steps, toward signatures, toward decisions that felt bigger than they had an hour earlier. Her phone buzzed again. This time she ignored it completely. She realized then that she hadn't stood up once since dinner, hadn't gone to the bathroom, hadn't stepped outside for air. The house felt closed in around her, walls pressing closer not physically, but perceptually. She tried to remember the last time she'd felt this uncertain around someone she knew, someone she was supposed to trust. Her stepmom reached across the table and placed a hand over hers. The touch was brief, firm, grounding. She might have called it once. Now it felt like a punctuation mark. "We're almost done," her stepmom said. "Just stay focused." She nodded, though nothing inside her felt settled anymore. And for the first time, the thought crossed her mind that leaving might not be as simple as standing up and walking out. She took a slow breath and placed both hands flat on the table, a small attempt to ground herself. "I think we should stop for tonight," she said, keeping her voice even. "My head's full. I'll come back another day." The words hung there, not challenged, not accepted. Her stepmom smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course," she said. "We can stop. I just want to make sure you understand everything before you go." She gathered the papers into a neat stack, tapping the edges against the table. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. Then she stood and carried them back to the coffee table, placing them carefully inside the box. She didn't offer it to her. She set it just out of reach. "You're under a lot of stress," her stepmom continued. "Grief does that. It makes people rush decisions or walk away from things they shouldn't." She nodded, unsure what to say. The conversation no longer felt like something she was participating in. It felt like something happening around her. Her stepmom moved toward the hallway, gesturing for her to follow. "There's something else I want to show you," she said. "It's related. It'll only take a minute." She hesitated. Every part of her wanted to stay where she was, to say no, to grab her purse and leave. But the request sounded harmless, familiar, a continuation of everything that had already happened. She followed. The hallway light was dimmer than the living room. The air felt cooler. They stopped near the home office, a small room with a desk pushed against the wall and file cabinets lining one side. Her stepmom reached inside a drawer and pulled out another folder. "This is why I wanted you to come tonight," she said, lowering her voice. "I didn't want to talk about it over the phone." She opened the folder, revealing more documents, older ones, copies, notes written in the margins. Her father's name appeared again and again. As she read, confusion crept in. Some of the dates didn't line up. Some of the explanations contradicted what she'd just been told. She looked up, about to ask a question, but her stepmom was already speaking, already reframing, already smoothing over the inconsistencies. "You have to trust me," she said. "I've been dealing with this longer than you have." The sentence landed heavier than it should have. She stepped back, creating space between them. Her heel brushed against something on the floor. The door behind her was closed now. She hadn't heard it shut. "I really should go," she said again, this time more firmly. "I can't make sense of this tonight." Her stepmom's expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. The warmth drained from her face, replaced by something flatter. More resolved. "It's late," she said. "You're upset. Driving like this isn't safe." "I'm fine," she replied. "I just need my keys." "They're in the other room," her stepmom said. "Sit down for a second." The request felt less like a suggestion now. She glanced past her stepmom toward the living room, toward the front door she could no longer see. Her phone was still in her bag, untouched for too long. The last message unread. The last chance to leave, quietly, already slipping away. Her stepmom took a step closer, blocking the doorway, without fully acknowledging she was doing it. "We're almost done," she said again. "After tonight, everything will be taken care of." The words echoed in the small room, and in that moment, she understood that this conversation was no longer about paperwork. It was about control, and the night had reached a point where walking away might no longer be an option. She stopped asking questions after that. Not because she understood, but because something in her told her questions were no longer welcome. The room felt smaller, now not in size, but in possibility. Every option she'd had earlier seemed to have narrowed to a single, uncomfortable path. Her stepmom turned away and began organizing the papers again, speaking as if the matter were settled. Her voice returned to that steady, reassuring tone, the one that suggested authority and care at the same time. It was disorienting. The shift made her doubt herself more than the situation. She sat down, slowly, not because she wanted to, but because standing felt too exposed. Her stepmom handed her a glass of water. She took it out of instinct, held it without drinking. The condensation dampened her palm. The clock on the wall ticked past 9, then 10. Time moved differently now, stretched and compressed in uneven ways. She thought about the drive home, about her bed, about the mug still sitting by her sink. Ordinary thoughts clung to like anchors. Her phone buzzed again. She felt it this time, a sharper vibration. She reached for her bag. Her stepmom noticed immediately. "Who keeps messaging you this late?" she asked lightly. "Just a friend," she said. "I should let them know I'm heading out." Her stepmom shook her head. "There's no point rushing off. We're in the middle of something important." She didn't argue. She just nodded and let her hand fall away from the bag. The phone went still. The conversation drifted after that. Less about documents, more about responsibility, about how messy things could get if people outside the family got involved. Lawyers, friends with opinions, strangers who didn't understand the full picture. Her stepmom spoke about protection, about keeping things quiet, about handling matters privately, the way her father would have wanted. At some point, the lights in the hallway went off. Then the kitchen. The house settled into a dim stillness, broken only by the lamp in the office. She noticed the silence between sentences growing longer. She tried once more to stand. Her stepmom placed a hand on her arm. Not hard, not aggressive, just enough to stop the movement. "Sit," she said. The word was calm, final. Her chest tightened. She became acutely aware of her breathing, of the sound it made in the quiet room. She wondered how long it had been since anyone outside this house had heard her voice. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she didn't reach for it. She stared at the floor instead, at the pattern in the rug she'd walked across earlier without a second thought. The buzzing stopped. Minutes passed. Or maybe longer. She couldn't tell anymore. Her stepmom stood and moved toward the door. She opened it slightly, peered into the hallway, then closed it again. The click of a latch echoed. When she returned, her expression was composed, almost relieved. "We're done for tonight," she said. "You should rest." The words didn't make sense. Rest where? How? She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Outside, the neighborhood was dark and quiet. No cars passed. No footsteps. No sounds that suggested the world beyond the walls was still moving. The last message on her phone went unanswered. The last signal from inside that house faded into silence. And by the time the front door opened again later that night, there was only one set of footsteps leaving the porch. Morning came without her. The light crept across the floor of her empty kitchen, catching on the rim of the coffee mug by the sink. It stayed there untouched. Her bed was still made. Her car wasn't in the driveway. At first, the absence didn't register as danger. She was an adult. She sometimes stayed out late. Maybe she decided to crash somewhere else. Maybe she turned her phone off and needed a break. Those explanations felt reasonable enough to hold onto for a few hours. The first call went to voicemail, then the second, then a text. Each unanswered attempt made the silence heavier. By late morning, concern began to settle in. Not panic, not yet, just a tightening awareness that something was off. She hadn't mentioned staying anywhere overnight. She hadn't taken anything with her. And she never ignored her phone this long. A friend stopped by the house after work, knocking on the door, calling her name. No answer. The lights were off. The car still missing. Her purse wasn't on the kitchen counter where she usually left it. Messages were sent. Calls were made. The unanswered list grew longer. By the afternoon, the word missing began to surface in conversations, spoken carefully, as if saying it too clearly might make it real. Her friends retraced her last known plans. The stepmom's house came up quickly. The evening visit. The paperwork. When someone called to ask about it, the response came back measured and calm. She had stopped by, yes. They'd talked, sorted through some documents. She'd left late. Everything had seemed fine, but details were vague. Times blurred. Nothing concrete. Her car was found later that day, parked neatly along a side street not far from the stepmom's neighborhood. Locked. No signs of struggle. Nothing inside to explain why it was there or how long it had been sitting. The absence of evidence only deepened the unease. People drove the route she would have taken home, scanning sidewalks and ditches, calling her name into empty spaces. Flyers were printed. Photos shared. Her face began to appear on screens and storefronts, frozen in a smile that no longer felt current. Her stepmom remained visible, available. She answered questions without hesitation, offering condolences, expressing concern. She said the right things. She appeared cooperative, helpful, but small inconsistencies emerged. The time she said the visit ended shifted slightly. The order of events changed in subtle ways. Nothing dramatic, nothing provable, just enough to make conversations circle back again and again. Her phone records showed activity late into the night. Pings near the stepmom's house. Then nothing. No movement after that. No outgoing messages. No calls. The last known location narrowed everything to one place. One evening. One door that had closed and not opened again for her. As night fell again, the weight of it pressed down on everyone who knew her. The sense that this wasn't a misunderstanding. That this wasn't a delay or a miscommunication. Something had gone wrong. And whatever happened inside that house hadn't stayed there quietly. It had left a space behind. A space where a woman had been. And where answers should have been too. As the days passed, the questions became harder to deflect. Concern sharpened into urgency. People wanted timelines. They wanted clarity. They wanted to know how someone could vanish so completely after an ordinary evening visit. Conversations grew more pointed. The stepmom was asked to walk through that night again. Slowly, carefully. Each detail mattered now. What time she arrived. What they talked about. When she left. Where she went next. The answers came smoothly, but they never landed quite the same way twice. One version placed the goodbye just after 10, another closer to 11. Sometimes they talked in the living room the whole time. Other times, paperwork had moved to the office. Small shifts, easy to dismiss, impossible to ignore. Her phone activity became a quiet anchor in the uncertainty. The last pings clustered around the house. The final signal faded not long after the front door had supposedly closed behind her. After that, nothing. No movement. No attempt to reach out. A silence that felt intentional. People close to her pointed out what didn't fit. She wouldn't have left without her purse. She wouldn't have ignored messages. She wouldn't have parked her car where it was found and walked away without telling anyone. The house itself became a focus, though no one said it outright at first. It was the last place she was seen, the last place her phone responded, the place she'd gone willingly, without fear. The stepmom continued to present herself as cooperative. She allowed conversations. She expressed frustration with the questions, but never anger. She said she wanted answers too, that she loved her stepdaughter and would never hurt her. But tension showed in quieter ways. Doors closed more often. Curtains stayed drawn. Neighbors noticed late-night lights flicking on and off. Movements that felt purposeful, contained. When contradictions were raised, they were met with explanations. Memory is unreliable under stress. Grief distorts time. Everyone processes shock differently. Still, the pressure mounted. The idea that this was an accident or a simple disappearance began to slip away. Too many things pointed back to that night, to that house. People started listening more carefully to what wasn't being said, to pauses in conversation, to the moments when answers came too quickly, as if rehearsed. The stepmom stopped volunteering details. Her responses grew shorter, more guarded. The warmth that had once defined her interactions cooled. Behind closed doors, theories formed, none spoken aloud, all circling the same uncomfortable truth. Whatever had happened hadn't involved strangers. It hadn't involved chance. It had involved trust. And trust, once broken, had a way of unraveling everything around it. As the search dragged on, without results, the question shifted. It was no longer just where she was. It was what had been done to ensure she wouldn't be found, and whether the silence surrounding that night was something that could be maintained, or something that would eventually collapse under its own weight. 8 weeks passed, and the absence settled into something permanent. Not closure, not peace, just a dull, constant awareness that she was no longer part of the world in the way she had been before. Her name was still spoken, her photo still circulated, but she was frozen in time, defined by the moment she disappeared. Her house remained untouched. Friends stopped by to water plants, to check mail, to stand quietly in rooms where she used to sit. The mug by the sink stayed where it was. No one had the heart to move it. The stepmom's house changed too. Neighbors noticed it first. The porch light stayed on through the night. The curtains rarely opened. The routine that once blended into the neighborhood now felt sealed off, inward-facing. Questions never fully stopped. They softened over time, replaced by procedural language and formal requests. But the night itself remained unresolved. No clear answers. No explanation that fit cleanly around the facts. The stepmom continued to deny any wrongdoing. She said she had done everything she could, that she had told the truth, that she was tired of being looked at as something she wasn't. But the silence lingered. What remained undeniable was the last sequence of events. She had driven to that house willingly. She had gone inside. Her phone had gone quiet there. And by the end of the night, only one person had walked back out. The story never offered the comfort of certainty. There was no moment where everything snapped into place. No clean ending, just fragments that refused to settle. For those who loved her, the unanswered questions became part of daily life, a constant undercurrent. They learned to carry it, even as it weighed them down. Trust had brought her through that door. Familiarity had kept her inside longer than she intended, and silence had done the rest. The house still stands, ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of place people pass without a second glance. But for those who know the story, it represents something else. A reminder that danger doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it invites you in, and sometimes when the door closes behind you, the night ends with only one set of footsteps walking back out. Time did what it always does. It kept moving, even when nothing else did. Seasons changed around the unanswered questions, around the space she left behind. The urgency faded for the outside world, but for the people who loved her, it never softened. It just learned how to exist quietly. Her house remained much the same. The boxes stayed stacked. The mug stayed by the sink. Dust gathered in places she used to clean without thinking. Friends stopped by less often as months passed, not because they cared less, but because standing inside that space hurt in ways they couldn't explain. The stepmom continued living her life within careful boundaries. She spoke rarely about that night anymore. When she did, the story never changed. Calm, controlled, complete. She insisted there was nothing more to say. But silence has its own weight. And over time, it began to press inward. People noticed what was missing as much as what remained. No phone activity beyond that night. No financial movement. No trace of a woman who had once been careful, methodical, rooted in routine. It was as if she had been erased at the moment the door closed behind her. The lack of resolution became its own form of ending. Not justice, not truth, just absence. Those closest to her learned to live with unanswered questions. They replayed small details over and over. The decision to go that evening. The hesitation before agreeing. The way trust had felt reasonable right up until it wasn't. They wondered how many moments existed where things could have gone differently. A message answered. A door reopened. A choice interrupted. But none of those moments came. What remained was a story defined not by violence on display, but by quiet control, by a familiar voice, by a house that looked safe from the outside, by help that asked nothing in return until it was too late. She had walked into that home, believing she would leave with clarity.